What's up, everybody? My name's Adam McDormand, and this is American Literature. Now, throughout the course of this school year, we've read a number of stories that have been challenging because they've forced us to confront some less than ideal aspect of the narrative of our nation, the story of America. And we're actually going to finish the school year looking at a genre that does that very same thing, but in a very different sort of way. We're going to look at what may very well be my favorite literary genre, science fiction. This week, you're going to read a story called By the Waters of Babylon by Vincent Benét. Now, as always, the best way for us to get the most out of this text is to start by knowing a little bit about the author's background, a little bit of historical context surrounding the story, and then finish up by looking at some of the key literary features of this story and looking at a few major thematic concepts through which we can best view the meaning of this story. Let's jump into it. The handsome man that you see before you is Vincent Benét, who lived from 1898 to 1943. He was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, into a military family. He is what we might refer to today as a military brat. Both his father, James, and his grandfather, who he was named after, served in the United States Army. Benét attended Yale University, where he was a major contributor to campus publications. He was a prolific writer. During his time in college, he wrote and published 3 complete collections of poetry. And it was this third collection that he submitted as his master's thesis, thus completing his master's degree in English in 1919. Shortly after that, Benét lived in France from 1920 to 1921, where he continued his studies on a Yale traveling fellowship. While he was there, he met and married Rosemary Carr. A few of Benét's notable works include a novel-length poem called John Brown's Body, which he published in 1929, a short story called The Devil and Daniel Webster from 1936, which you will recognize as kind of an allusion or a reference to a story we read much earlier this year, The Devil and Tom Walker by Washington Irving, about a man who makes a deal with the devil. And then the story that you're going to read this week, By the Waters of Babylon, which he wrote in 1937. Benét won the Pulitzer Prize in 1929 for that novel-length poem, John Brown's Body, and again in 1944. Which was actually awarded to him posthumously because he passed away of a heart attack in 1943. So let's talk a little bit about the historical context of By the Waters of Babylon. On April 21st, 1937, the civilian town of Guernica in Spain was bombed by military forces. And this little piece of history is pretty wild. This happened during the Spanish Civil War, which took place when a group of nationalists rebelled against the Spanish Republic. Now, obviously, a group of rebels is not going to have access to significant military might. So this rebel group actually allied with Nazi Germany and the fascist kingdom of Italy. And they employed the air forces of Nazi Germany and Italy to bomb the town of Guernica, which was populated mostly by civilians. The nationalists did eventually win the Civil War, and that whole thing was kind of a precursor to World War II. On July 31st, that very same year, this short story was published in the Saturday Evening Post, actually under a different title. Obviously, the story contains sort of a hidden response to the bombing of Guernica, but I think it's very interesting to keep in mind the fact that this story predates the Manhattan Project by about 5 years. If you know your history, you know that the Manhattan Project is the research program that ultimately resulted in the creation of the nuclear bomb. In this story, Benét presents an imaginative tale about the ultimate end of this arms race that began with the bombing of Guernica in 1937. Let's talk about some of the main literary features of this story. By the Waters of Babylon is told from a first-person perspective. That means we see everything from the point of view of the protagonist, John. All the information that we get in this story comes from this perspective. It gets filtered through John's observations, what he knows about the world, and how he makes sense of the things that he sees. The thing that makes By the Waters of Babylon really fun to read is the fact that as you get further and further in the story, you start to see a dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is where the audience knows things that the characters in the story do not. Because of what you know about the world as it exists now, you'll start to put some pieces together that John doesn't realize. There's certain information that he doesn't know, some things about the world that are completely foreign to him. And that gap between what John knows and what we know as the reader is the dramatic irony. By the Waters of Babylon is an example of post-apocalyptic fiction. Now, the word apocalypse essentially means the end of the world, and post-apocalypse means the thing that comes after that. Now, I don't want to get into the details of why this story fits into that genre, because I think figuring that out is part of what makes the story really fun. But I do want you to have it in the back of your mind that this is a story about mankind after some sort of world-ending event. And keep your eye out for the signs. And kind of the final literary feature that I want you to keep in mind as you're reading this story is the title itself, By the Waters of Babylon. This is a very cryptic title, but it contains something called literary allusion. Allusion is when a story refers to some other literary text or historical event or person, something outside of the story that it's referring to. And this story is alluding to the historical Babylonian Empire. For most of us, if we've heard of the Babylonian Empire, it's because we've heard of it in the Old Testament from the Bible. So we're going to take a look at a couple of specific places where Babylon is referred to in the Old Testament. We're going to start with Psalm 137, which is a poem that may well have been written by Jeremiah during the exile of the nation of Israel in Babylon. It says, "By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you. If I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us." This psalm contains some very powerful language about the anguish of captivity, about being taken from your homeland, watching your city be destroyed and brought low, and being in a way mocked by your captors, asked to sing the songs of your homeland while you can't see it, while it's far away, while you are removed from it. And at the same time, the psalm contains a warning for the people of Israel not to forget what happened, not to forget the anguish of being taken from your homeland. It begs the reader to cling to the longing to return home. And you'll see how this story kind of plays on that idea of not knowing what happened, about forgetting the past, and the sort of curse that that carries with it. And lastly, I want to look at just a very small bit of Jeremiah 51. We're going to look at verses 54 through 56. It says, "A voice, a cry from Babylon, the noise of great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans. For the Lord is laying Babylon waste and stilling her mighty voice. There waves roar like many waters, the noise of their voices raised. For a destroyer has come upon her, upon Babylon. Her warriors are taken, their bows are broken in pieces. For the Lord is a God of recompense. He will surely repay. And this is also a very powerful bit of poetic language about what happens when power is wielded, when the oppressor is brought low, right? Babylon has taken Israel away from Jerusalem, has conquered it, has put it in exile, and there will be a day of reckoning when that evil is paid back, in a sense. And you'll see, in a way, how this story plays with that idea as well. So let's finish up with some of the big thematic ideas of this story. One of them is the idea of power and truth. Is it a good idea for the darker parts of history to be hidden? What if those who are in authority command the truth to remain hidden? I had a student who once told me that history is good because it is just the truth about what has happened. But think about what that word actually means, what it actually consists of. History is a story. And it's a story that's written and told by the winners of wars. And if that's the case, then you have to consider that we, in the present, use the lessons from the past to guide us into our future. In a way, this text begs the question, what happens when parts of history are hidden because they've been deemed too dangerous, because they might undermine the narrative or story being told to us by these winners of wars? Secondly, we have the idea of technology. Is technology morally neutral, meaning neither good nor bad? Should we continue to develop new technology simply for the sake of having cool new stuff? Here we have to question the difference between knowledge and wisdom. We might know stuff, but do we know what to do with the knowledge we have? Can we wield it safely? There's a phrase that I like to use when discussing this topic, and it's this: just because we can doesn't mean we should. Think about that as you're reading this story. And last, but certainly not least, we have the idea of warfare. Is war good? Is it acceptable? Should we support it? It may not be immediately apparent as you're reading this story what these major thematic concepts have to do with the text. So I highly recommend that you maybe jot these three things down and glance at them as you make your way through the story, just to remind yourself that you're looking for some clues. At this point, I've laid out all of the pieces of the puzzle on the table in front of you. And the fun for me, and also for you if you're willing to do a little bit of work with this text, comes when you put all of these pieces together to get the full picture of this story. So I'm going to ask you one question, and that is, why is this story titled By the Waters of Babylon? As always, I hope that you enjoy this story and that you do take the time to read it and to make sense of what this has to say about the potential future of humanity. And we'll get together and talk about it very soon. Good luck. Have fun. What a time to be alive.